Hello and welcome to another episode here in Vienna at the DSM Firmenich Global Aqua Days. My name is Moritz Müller. I'm the Managing Director of the Fish side. I'm here today with Louise Battle, Global Key Account Manager, DSM Firmenich. Welcome, Louise.
Thank you.
How you doing?
All good.
Yeah, all good? Yeah.
Been a busy few days.
Yeah.
Fantastic, a lot of energy.
Yeah?
Yeah.
No, I'm glad to hear it. I think you probably have a lot of your clients and customers here.
Absolutely, and also colleagues within DSM that you hardly see.
Okay.
You know, you're hardly ever in the same place, so that's been fantastic.
Nice. It's homecoming.
Yeah.
Yeah. Louise, you started your presentation with something quite interesting. I thought you said you were destined for warm water.
Yeah.
How come?
Yeah, well, as I said earlier, I was born in the English summer. I did my PhD in the African catfish, which lives happily at 25 degrees. And then I married a Brazilian. So all of that led to what should have been a warm water life. Mm-hmm. But in fact, I started my career in Scotland. I lived in Chile the start of the 2000s, and then also lived and worked, of course, in Norway. And all that time it was for EWOS and then Cargill Aqua Nutrition. So working on the feed side, R&D, quality management teams, sustainability teams, and like applications, so innovation application to products in the business.
So all about salmon in the end.
All about salmon, yeah.
What's your background?
So PhD in nitrogen physiology of the African catfish, and then over 20 years working in salmon feed, and then recently been with DSM for 4.5 years.
All right. You feeling at home yet?
It takes some time. And we had the COVID pandemic in the middle. So a little bit slow.
Okay.
Yeah.
You brought us a present here today.
Yep, some magic.
So I can just show this. I don't know if you can see this. What do we have here?
So this is going to change the world.
All right.
This is single cell protein. It's a prototype that was produced by the bioscience team in DSM Firmenich in Delft. Fantastic team, experts in fermentation process, downstream processing, and this is concentrated protein. So it's a perfect fit for the raw material protein gap that we have in salmon farming.
All right.
So the project name is Smart Protein. And we're looking at 70% protein content. And of course, fermentation processes, you have very little land use. You don't have marine use, and you can basically scale up. So the challenge always with novel raw materials is the price and the availability. And today, of course, that's also around footprint, your environmental footprint. So they're the kind of three levers in raw material, but with single cell protein and fermentation processes, flexibility in the host, flexibility in the feedstock, because just like fish, you have to feed the bugs. It's a really exciting project.
Sounds like it.
And single cell proteins is nothing new. You know, 20 years ago, we were looking at products, testing products in fish, but now with new technologies, with different selections, we've developed this one, which is concentrated protein. Yeah, so it's performed really well in fish.
Which is quite important for the topic.
Which is basically important, yeah. So at high inclusion levels, so up to 20%.
Oh, wow.
So normally around 10%, maybe you start to see a bit of a a fall off in performance, but this prototype worked really fantastically in rainbow trout.
Well, we'll keep
Yep.
an eye on it.
Yep, it's
Very
one
exciting.
to watch.
Talking about one to watch, or talking about sustainability, really, you asked the question in your presentation, is salmon the gold standard for sustainable protein?
Yep.
Why'd you ask that question? How come?
I think sustainability is complex. Of course, it's difficult to unpick. In sustainability, there's financial sustainability, and of course, we heard from Rabobank, from Guyane on Tuesday that salmon is a fantastically profitable business. So we can tick the box of financial sustainability. But then environmental sustainability has many different indicators. And the salmon industry actually started that discussion over 20 years ago. And that was driven by reputational issues. So there is really a lot of history and a lot of experience with developing indicators that really map the sustainability of salmon. And of course, it's salmon as a species, there's many advantages in terms of feed conversion, in terms of yield, in terms of you're not farming animals on land, you're farming animals in the sea. So there's all these indicators pointing towards the benefits and the opportunities of salmon as an eco-efficient protein.
Well, yeah, it does make sense. However, there is something that, of course, influences everything you're producing.
Yeah.
And what I'm hinting on is raw material markets.
Yeah.
Right? Over the last 20 years, in your presentation, you've had some very impressive graphs around that. How has raw material use in salmon developed over the last 20 years? Where have we seen the biggest changes and the biggest impact?
Yeah, I think that the obvious one is the reduction in the use of fish meal and fish oil. And that was really where the sustainability challenges started with salmon farming. And you see in the past a lot of focus and a lot of flexing of the salmon feed industry to use different waste streams in terms of marine byproducts, so using trimmings, meals from whitefish. And actually the industry has done a really smart job with that. And all the companies are reporting on that move towards trimmings. But of course, just because you're using a waste stream doesn't mean that that's sustainable. So at the same time, there's lots of work around responsible sourcing of marine ingredients. And of course, EFO has played a large role in that. And now with their standards body following up and tracking the sustainability of those fisheries resources.
Can you elaborate on that standards body?
Yeah, I can't remember the name. It's just gone, but I can let you know.
Yeah, we can also put that overlay that here. But, what type of standards are we talking here?
Yeah. So, and then there's the Marine Stewardship Council, of course, MSC, and then you've got the development of the standards focusing on aquaculture, so ASC, BAP, Global GAP.
Yeah.
So a big framework of standards in different parts of the value chain for salmon.
A topic that I think most are familiar with is the fact that salmon farms in mainstream media have been quite regularly slandered for
Yeah.
reasons that we both know, because we have visited many salmon farms,
Yeah.
are really not visible, not true in that
Yeah.
sense. Now, where do the real challenges lie, and where does this antagonism come from, do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And, you know, I think the industry is really good at talking to different parts of the industry, but we're probably could work better to communicate to the outside world, because there's a lot of technical detail. The devil's in the detail, and when you're tracing raw materials, you're tracing feed production, you're tracing fish. It's it's not simple. But I always say, you know, with a farmed salmon, you know exactly where it's been, what it's eaten, where it was harvested. And so in terms of traceability of that food protein, it's in a fantastic position.
Yeah, yeah.
But of course, in terms of raw materials, it would be amiss not to mention soy.
Mm-hmm.
And still today, soy protein concentrate mainly sourced from Brazil. If we think about the raw material use in Norway, there's stakeholder concerns around the use of that soy and deforestation for obvious reasons. And at the same time, soy protein concentrate is just a fantastic raw material.
Mm-hmm.
And we're in a position where, of course, you reduce the marine content of the feeds, the marine protein content, and the companies develop this supply chain of soy protein concentrate. But then soy protein concentrate has its own concerns. Overall, the challenge, of course, is that there's a limited raw material basket.
Mm-hmm.
And that is especially true for the feeds in the northern hemisphere, because basically within this irony where we ship animal byproducts to South America, and from South America we import soy, because there's not a market acceptance for animal byproducts, despite the fact that they're allowed for use
Mm-hmm.
under EU regulations. So that's the challenge, is this limited raw material basket because of the nutritional requirements of salmon and the demand for protein-rich raw materials.
Right. That's a very important point, because looking towards the future, we know salmon is a fantastically profitable industry, also for the fact that the demand is huge, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think you mentioned yesterday to me in a private conversation that it was demonstrated that although people ate a lot more salmon at home during COVID,
Yeah.
that usage did not drop off, that buying
Yeah,
did not
exactly.
drop off when the restaurants reopened.
Yeah,
that
when the
means
Horeca segment.
Exactly, right? So the net salmon consumption now is
Yeah.
actually higher than before COVID.
Yeah.
And the prices haven't, the prices have only gone up since. So that situation, though, puts us in a difficult situation looking forward with resource
Yeah.
use, because we want to scale this industry. There's demand in the market. It's a fantastically sustainable and healthy food. But how do we scale it without, at the same time, scaling our resource use at the same amount?
Yeah, exactly. And of course, for sustainable growth of aquaculture, one of the driving factors is sustainable raw materials at scale, concentrated protein at an affordable price. But that's really where single-cell proteins have a role to play in terms of scalability, in terms of nutrient quality. It's definitely one to watch.
All right, very good. Staying on the topic of of resources, raw material,
Yeah.
and their availability, especially. In the last 2 years, we've seen a certain degree of turbulence in the world, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
What challenge does that pose for the industry at the moment?
I think it's pretty apparent that the people responsible for procurement of raw materials have never seen such a challenge. So you can't grow fish without feed, and it's been really a tough environment. On top of that, we should also prepare for the future in terms of estimates around global warming and what that 1.5 or what that 3-degree global temperature increase will do to our raw material availability and prices, obviously, with supply and demand curves fluctuating. So yeah, challenging, very challenging period. There's obviously the El Nino as well on top of that. So it's not just the vegetable raw materials and the geopolitical issues. There's also this phenomenon impacting the Peruvian fishery that we also heard about from Rabobank. So, yeah.
Turbulent waters at the moment.
Turbulent waters, and not many signals that it's going to get much easier going forward, at least in the short term.
Right. Let's look at the positive side of things for a moment, maybe. Opportunities in the sector going forward.
Yeah.
What are the main opportunities? What do we need to see more of going forward?
Yeah. So really, opportunities around maybe technology adoption, development of novel raw materials, and also opportunities that are driven by stakeholder demands. I think that with sustainability, it can be really challenging to navigate as an organisation in terms of resource use, in terms of understanding, but also can you collect that data that you need to follow through on your sustainable journey. So yeah, there's
What enable that data collection? Like, is there a question of developing new technology? Is there a question of deploying more technology? Is there space for startups in this? Should this be corporate side driven?
I think it's always it's a combination of approaches. I think technology adoption is partly around timing, of course. And if I think about what will make life easier in terms of sustainability reporting, one obvious thing is connectivity of data. So moving away from working with different databases.
Yeah.
And of course, knowing the numbers for your business, not having to rely on industry averages.
So coming from resources, more towards the fact that salmon is a bit of an outlier compared to other species in aquaculture, right? It's a highly technologized industry.
Yeah.
It's consolidated.
Industry.
It's big players, lots of money, lots of technology. The rest of aquaculture doesn't quite look like that.
Yeah.
What can we learn? What can we leverage into maybe the rest of the industry?
Yeah, I think the framework that the salmon farmers and salmon feed companies, and of course it's not just salmon feed, is it? Because the aqua nutrition companies are producing feed for both shrimp and salmon, other species. It's about this framework that they've developed and how you can adopt that to different species and really piggyback on that experience the last years within salmon and like jump forward, and select what is appropriate for each of these species. Because as you say, you've got these giants in Norway, financially driven, and it's not going to be that framework that every shrimp farmer or every tilapia farmer, of course, is going to need to adopt.
Mm-hmm. How can we decarbonize in salmon? Talking about an issue that is, on everybody's mind. You also mentioned the rising challenge of the climate development.
Yeah.
What's already happening versus decarbonization? And I think you picked something up in your presentation, considering that also as an opportunity.
Yeah. So what's happening in the last year or 18 months is that some of the larger salmon farming companies and also the feed companies have signed up to science-based targets for greenhouse gas emissions. And that's Scope 1, Scope 2 and Scope 3 emissions. That's a public target that they've signed up to. And I think that's really a step forward in terms of focus and timeline, because actually 2030 is not that far away if you think about crop cycles. A lot of that decarbonisation journey for farmed aquaculture will be driven by the raw materials. There's estimates that range from 60 to 80% of a farmed fish footprint that is directly related to feed and raw materials. So that's definitely why the focus on novel raw materials needs to be around low carbon footprint materials.
Right. Okay. Something a bit more maybe where you could inspire a younger generation here.
Why are you saying I'm old?
No, but you are.
you need to be careful. You're speechless now.
Very good, very good. Catching me out here. No, but we are, as an industry, we have a negative portrayal sometimes in the media, which is completely not true anymore at this point. It's basically, in my opinion, they're picking up stories from the 80s and keep on spinning them. But what would you recommend, for somebody who's, just coming off university, something like that, like you back then, when your dream of warm water was still alive? How to get into this industry, where to focus, and where can you, as a young person saying, I want to work on great food, and I want to work on a source of food that has really an impact. Where would you go in aquaculture?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think the role of fish health and welfare will be very prominent in years to come. And I think you're always going to need that expertise, because the value of those fish in the water and the risk from the ecosystem is really potentially so high. So knowing those fish and prioritising the fish health, fish welfare, definitely expertise in that. All
right. Well, very good. We'll take that out to the world. Make sure it's heard. Please, thank you very much for the conversation. Pleasure having you here.